they're gone. So about a month ago, I decided I would order some autobiographies of people who were in the original Star Trek crew because that's who I am as a person now. And I just bought them online. I just went to like a used online bookstore. An online used bookstore. There it is. And I ordered 3. I ordered a Leonard Nimoy, I ordered a Nichelle Nichols, and I ordered a George Takei. I received the Leonard Nimoy. Delightful. I am not Spock. Who are you then? Huh? The Nichelle Nichols. Beyond Uhura. Lovely. And third, but certainly not least, I received An Irresistible Impulse by Billie Douglass, which is not what I was expecting to receive. And it turns out that this book and the George Takei book have the same ISBN, which technically should never happen. But it did. Okay. Things happen. Mistakes happen. I contacted the seller and I was like, hey, thanks for the books. You sent me the wrong one. They were like, gosh, okay. We'll send you a correct one. We'll send you the version you want. So like a week later, I received in the mail An Irresistible Impulse by Billie Douglass, meaning that I now have 2 copies of a book about a jury duty romance. Who wouldn't want one of those, I guess? I just heard a ferret make a suspicious noise that I sort of feel like I should check on. Please hold. These are ferrets. This is Wedge Antilles, and this is Biggs Darklighter. Okay, goodbye. They would like to go. They don't often get to be up here, so they're very excited. Billie Douglass is a pseudonym for Barbara Delinsky, who is a romance writer. Anyway, I still haven't received that George Takei book. The site I ordered from said they don't actually have that version of it. So I'll just have to order it from somewhere else. But until that day comes, I thought I would mess around and maybe read this book. I have sort of skimmed the first chapter or so, but other than that, I haven't read the rest of it. I don't know how it goes. Obviously, I'm going to share that with you. I do have a book podcast that I contemplated reading it on, but there's just something about like seeing someone's expressions when they're reading a book that just really gives you a certain experience. So, welcome to the special video edition of Backlog Books, I guess. And let's get started. Our book this week is An Irresistible Impulse by Billie Douglass. Here is the summary. 3 weeks on sequestered jury duty looked like heaven to Abby Barnes, who had problems she was only too eager to leave behind. Then she met fellow juror Ben Wyeth, and suddenly she had a new problem, one she was forced to confront. The ferrets are still making noise. There's a trash bag over there, and they love trash bags. Love didn't come easy to Ben, but never before had he met a woman as giving, as loving, as right for him as Abby. He was afraid to commit himself and unable to let go. It was up to Abby to teach him how very much it meant to give in to emotion and hold on forever. Sounds like Abby's going to be doing a lot of emotional labor in this book. Let's see. Oh, that's kind of sad. Pages are kind of bent. keep looking over there because that's where my laptop is. Ooh, we have a map of Vermont for some reason. I guess it happens in Vermont. Probably. Otherwise, it's a very weird map. Chapter 1. Shortly after noon on a bright fall Wednesday, Abigail Barnes was taken into custody. She was escorted down the center aisle of the crowded courtroom by a somber-faced sheriff's guard. Whether it was apprehension or excitement that threatened her steadiness, she wasn't sure. But she was oddly grateful for the firmness of the hand at her elbow, guiding her through the large black leather-sheathed doors. I guess I don't go to a lot of courthouses, despite having a job that involves lawsuits. I don't think I've ever seen a leather-sheathed door or heard a door described as leather-sheathed. To the stairway that wound to the ground floor of the Windsor County Courthouse. "Van is waiting out front," the burly guard clipped. As they started down the creaking steps. Abby simply nodded, too concerned with matching his pace on the narrow stairs to say a word. Reaching the door, she was whisked through, then momentarily exposed to the noontime sun as the guard hurried her down the short granite path before inserting her into the dark blue van standing at the curb. Because she's a box, you can just put her in the van. She was barely seated when the door slid shut with a jarring bang. Her gaze flew questioningly to the uniformed driver as the guard returned to the courthouse. "Where?" she began, looking wide-eyed and helpless enough to evoke sympathy. Is she doing it on purpose? Because if she's doing it on purpose, I'm like, get it, girl. There's a ferret sniffing something over here. What is it? Why do you like that so much? Weirdo. "He's gone to get the others. Then we'll be on our way." "The others?" she asked softly. "So there were others?" It had been impossible to tell the fate of those taken from the holding room before she herself had been called. "2 others, the guard informed her smugly. "We're getting there." What does that mean? Satisfied, he turned his attention to the gaggle of curious bystanders scattered on the lawn, the sidewalk, the street. Following his gaze, Abby seemed to notice the crowd for the first time. Seemed to notice the crowd? So we're like third person omniscient? Is that what this viewpoint is? "What are they staring at?" she whispered self-consciously, the question simply an expression of dismay to which she didn't expect an answer. She received one, nonetheless. Men can't help talking. "You." The guard tossed the single word back over his shoulder, then said no more. Blech. Abby shivered in anticipation of what was to come. Lowering her head and settling more deeply into her seat in a futile effort to escape the eyes beyond, she yielded to amazement as she reviewed the events of the morning. Okay. We're going to time skip to this morning. It's only noon. It can't have been that long. Okay. It had seemed that she'd been sitting for hours, when in fact it had only been 90 minutes. So an hour and a half. Closing the medical journal. Okay, honey. Closing the medical journal in her lap, she shifted on the splint-back chair in an effort to get comfortable, then raised her eyes to study quietly her companions in the small jury room. I would pay you money to study them loudly. Propped straight in identically unyielding chairs, these men and women represented a cross-section of their Vermont. Wow, that was difficult. represented a cross-section of the Vermont she'd come to know well. Are you going to tell me more about that or not? No? Okay. No one could deny the subtle tension in the air. Each person in the room had heard the judge at the start of the morning session and knew that, should he be chosen as juror for this trial, his or her freedom, or their freedom, would be sharply curtailed for the next 3 weeks. I'm contemplating making this language more gender neutral, but that wouldn't really be true to the text, so we'll keep it, I guess. 3 weeks. To Abby, the thought was not as odious as it might have been a year earlier. Then there had been no Sean Hennessy in her life, pressuring her for a commitment she simply couldn't make. The chase hadn't even begun then. Now it tired her. 3 weeks of captivity might offer an odd but welcome freedom. Her lips toyed with a mischievous smile as she took a breath and sat back. Okay. She recalled the moment earlier that morning when the judge had addressed the gathered group, explaining the mechanics of a locked-up jury, asking to see those who, for one reason or another, couldn't possibly serve. A good half of those present had stepped forward, each taking a private turn before the judge, offering his best excuse and a plea for sympathy. In the majority of cases, it was forthcoming. Judge Theodore Hammond. I just like the name Theodore. I don't know, you don't see it often. Knew the importance of weighing civic responsibility against emotional hardship. His jurors would have to be in top shape to absorb the barrage of testimony presented to them. The Bradley case promised to be a headliner. It wasn't every day that the grown son of one of the state's most prominent citizens stood a trial on charge of kidnapping. Ooh. The soft hum of conversation brought Abby's attention back to her fellows, several of whom carried on discussions among themselves. Others had buried themselves in books or magazines. Still others stared distractedly out the windows at the sparkling fall morning, much as she might have been tempted to do had her attention not been caught by a pair of warm, gray eyes. Okay. Also, we're not going to hear anything about the cross-section of Vermont, are we? We're just going to talk about this guy with warm gray eyes. Slowly, she turned her head toward her viewer. He was every bit the man. He was every bit the man. With a rakishly rich head of tawny brown hair, a face full of character, and a build that spoke of virility combined with grace. So he's a square. He's a rectangle. I don't know, you didn't tell me anything except he has brown hair and gray eyes. Abby was intrigued by the contrast he presented to the average man in the room. He was younger, probably not yet in his 40s, charmingly casual in tan corduroy slacks and a matching blazer patched at the elbows, and he wore a certain air of worldliness she found captivating. As he lounged against the sill of one of the 4 ceiling-to-hip windows, which is a normal window size, he seemed much more relaxed than the others. She wondered whether he too might have a secret reason for appreciating a 3-week hiatus from routine. But she averted her eyes, feeling strangely shy when the stranger's brow furrowed in puzzlement. Perhaps he too wondered. Wondered what? What are we talking about? Abby's gaze was one of the many that shot toward the door as it opened to allow for the court officer's appearance. James Zarsilla? He read from his list. Ferrets. Hey, buddy. Are you done? Do you want to talk about it? No, he wants to get in this bag. Not that I blame him. He's just going to make a huge mess. Oh, God. Hey, buddy. Hey. This is Wedge again. What? Okay, goodbye. What do you know? Okay. Calling a name, he read from his list, faltering slightly, relieved when a middle-aged man in a worn brown suit recognized the pronunciation and rose to be led upstairs to the courtroom. The tremor of a collective sigh whispered its relief through those remaining. You're all gonna get called... you're not all gonna get called up, probably. Venturing another glance at the man by the window, Abby was pleased to find that he, too, had detected the murmur and found similar amusement in it. Look, we like the same things. For it was an odd waiting game they played. This was the third full day of jury selection. Of 14 jurors needed, the usual 12 plus 2 alternates, 9 had already been chosen. And there was no way of knowing how many had been added to the roster from those interviewed this morning. I mean, under 5. It wasn't unrealistic to assume that at any time now the judge would declare a successful impanelment of the jury and announce the prompt dismissal of those not chosen to serve. That was the obvious prayer of most in the room. Not so Abby. Granted, the thought of being sealed off from the world for a period of 3 weeks had disadvantages for her, too. There were numerous commitments, both professional and personal, that she'd very much miss. Yet she somehow felt it to be a worthwhile trade. With a sigh, she drew back the soft cuff of her blouse to reveal the oval face of her slim gold watch. Okay. 11:30. A busy time at the office. Janet would be covering for her. But then would come lunch, and the good Dr. Hennessy wouldn't settle for Janet. He'd be after Abby. Always after Abby. I think you should get a new job, honey. If only she returned his love. But she didn't. And, nuisance that he was notwithstanding, she simply couldn't tell him to buzz off. For one thing, he was her boss. File a sexual harassment suit. For another, she was too kind a soul to hurt him. What? No! Hurt his feelings. He could listen. If he's hitting on his employees, he needs someone to hurt his feelings. With a baseball bat. Okay. After all, they'd been dating for months, and she did care for him deeply. What? You're dating your boss? Honey. Babe. So you're just gonna ghost him and spend 3 weeks doing jury duty? Okay. I think you could just break up with him. There had to be another solution. Abigail Barnes. Her head shot up as her name echoed loudly from the door. Returning from distraction with a startled blink, she realized that this one moment of truth at least was at hand. Composing herself, she tucked the journal into her bag, rose from the chair, and walked forward. She was aware of every eye in the room following her, but hesitated before the court officer only long enough to spare a sidelong glance at the man by the window. Answering his wink for good luck with a shy smile of her own, she crossed the threshold and followed her leader toward the stairs. Why do you know it's a good luck wink? Maybe he's just trying to flirt. It was the last smile to cross her lips for a while. One simply didn't smile while seated on the witness stand facing 3 sober judges, as opposed to drunk judges, opposing teams of stern-faced lawyers, a packed gathering of spectators and media representatives, and an intent-eyed defendant. The defendant is there? For the jury selection? Is that how that works? I don't care. One simply filled in one's name, address, and occupation when asked to, elaborated wherever it was requested, and answered as honestly as possible any other questions posed. At only one point had Abby been concerned that her forthrightness might remove her from consideration. It had been when the judge had rocked back in his oversized chair and narrowed his gaze at her. On her, whatever. Now, Miss Barnes, we come to the sticky matter of pre-trial publicity. As you know, the purpose of a sequestered jury is to protect the jurors from any force that might possibly influence them during the course of the trial. This is pre-internet. This is 83. We have no control, however, over what you may have picked up in newspapers or on television during the past weeks and months. Please answer me as honestly as you can. He had levered himself forward then, stressing the gravity of his plea. Have you either heard or read anything about this trial prior to your coming here today? Frowning, Abby had wondered how any thinking person in the state could have arrived here in total ignorance. Very easily. The very fact that there had been a change of venue from the northern county where the crime was purported to have taken place was evidence of the wealth of publicity that had surrounded the case. The press had been concerned with little else for days. Yes, she admitted with soft trepidation. I followed the story. She held her breath, waiting, but he seemed neither surprised nor discouraged. Could you tell me what you remember hearing or reading? Feeling awkward for the first time, all too aware of the defendant sitting not 5 yards away, she kept her eyes on the judge. I've read that Derek Bradley, the defendant, was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of his former lover, who claims that he took her to an isolated cabin and kept her there for several weeks. Actually, most of what I've read has dealt with the publicity that will surround the trial once it begins. The judge nodded. I understand. Now, I want you to consider whether you feel you've formed an opinion based on what you've read. I have. In other words, do you already have an assumption as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant? Lowering her head, Abby had pondered the question. Then she looked back at the judge. No, I don't believe so. It's the role of the court, not the media, to determine the guilt or innocence of a person. Who are you? Then you feel you'd be able to hear the evidence with an open mind? Yes, she responded with the confidence she felt. Still sober. I hope so. The judge looked toward the lawyers. The court finds this juror indifferent. Mr. Whites? It's the accent. I shouldn't have done the accent. Indifferent, it appeared, was a good thing to be if one wanted to serve on a jury. Within minutes, she had been duly sworn in and committed to the state for the next few weeks of her life. I mean, that is assuming this case only takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That is an extremely short period of time. The van door slid open abruptly. Oh, remember we were in a van? Jolting Abby back to the present. 2 people climbed in. The guard shut the door firmly behind them and took his place riding shotgun up front, and the engine came to life. There's a lot happened in that sentence. Inching its way along a narrow path between parallel lines of parked cars like a road. Along like a road? The van gained speed only when it rounded the town green and found clear space to proceed westward. Like another road? Taking a deep breath, Abby looked hesitantly at her fellow passengers, a man and a woman, both seeming as stunned as she. Jurors, she ventured softly. What else would they be? Okay. Her eyes wide with caution. It was the woman, middle-aged and innocuous, who spoke first. Afraid so. You too? Uh-huh. I'm Abby Barnes. The older woman nodded her head. Louise Campbell. Louise is a lesbian, I'm calling it now. Abby smiled in acknowledgement of the introduction, then turned toward the man, who was slightly older than Louise and that much more grim. Hi, she said, tipping her head sideways. Girl? The man hesitated before somehow managing a perfunctory smile for her benefit. I assume He turned his lips up at the corners. Mouth up at the corners? It's usually how people manage a smile. His voice was as solemn and nearly as begrudging as the dark cast of his eyes. It's Tom Herrick. It's Tom Herrick. Who introduces themselves like that? Nice to meet you, I guess. Wish it were under other circumstances. Abby's smile was more genuine this time. It's a shock to the system, isn't it? She asked rhetorically. Then, reluctant to push her luck, she quietly redirected herself to Louise. What will you be missing? For a woman who had given her name so laconically, I'm going to look up the word laconically. Using or involving the use of a minimum of words, concise to the point of seeming rude or mysterious. Ooh, I like it. Louise Campbell was surprisingly fast to fill Abby in on what was obviously annoying issue. I'll be missing my job. I'm a dietitian for the Springfield Public Schools. Mostly, though, I'll be missing my husband. Oh, Louise. Honestly, I could brain that man. Her frustration came through loud and clear. I mean, I got it. I might have easily been excused for reasons of his health. He has high blood pressure and numerous other little ailments, and he's on a very restricted diet. Do you need a dietitian for public schools? I didn't go to public school. She scowled and adopted a faintly mocking tone. But he gave me a lecture last night about my responsibility to the state. He all but forbid me to use him as an excuse. I think he wants a vacation. Abby would have chuckled had she not seen the keen worry on the woman's face. I'm sure he'll be fine. She tried to offer comfort, a token thing since she knew neither this woman nor her husband. Yeah, that's called being polite. Is there anyone else at home with him? No. He's alone, and he'll probably put on 3 pounds a week eating everything I've denied him for the past 2 years. Well, maybe he'll give himself a heart attack. Nah, Abby scoffed playfully. Maybe he'll surprise you and behave himself. Humph, was the woman's only response. And as quickly as the conversation had begun, it ended. Taking a deep breath, Abby looked from one shuttered face to the other, then turned her attention to the passing scenery. Lord only knew there would be time aplenty for conversation with these two during the next few weeks. And the others, who would they be? Would there be anyone with whom she'd really be able to talk? Is the state going to provide you, like, clothes and stuff? Do you get to pack a bag? Maybe we'll find out. Not, she mused, that she was dependent on friends for her own emotional stability. Well, good for you. To the contrary, she saw herself as being abundantly self-sufficient, living alone and enjoying the solitude. Get it? Girl. Every major decision she'd made in her 28 years had been truly hers. You sure? Because there's like you're dating your boss who you don't like but can't break up with. Yet perhaps it was precisely this independent lifestyle that heightened her appreciation for the companionship of others. Warm companionship, stimulating companionship. An intelligent mind off which she might bounce her thoughts. Interesting thoughts to bounce off her own mind. Unbidden came the image of one tawny-haired man. What if he were chosen? It might be fun, she mused idly. And interesting. He obviously had a sense of humor. Okay. That, she sensed, was going to be a necessity in the days and weeks ahead. The turn of the van from the main road onto a private one brought more immediate thoughts to mind. She'd been familiar with the route they'd taken, had driven it many times herself. Toward Killington to ski, toward Rutland to shop. Is that on the map? Well, there's Rutland. Where's Killington? It's not on the map. Because I don't know where Killington is, that's not actually helpful. Yet she'd never taken this side road. They hadn't been driving for more than 5 minutes. Outside of town? Okay. Logistically, it would be right. To either side, towering stands of pine and hemlock crowded the shoulder of the road, leaning eagerly forward for a better view of the van and its passengers in much the same way the people in town had done. Somehow I don't think the trees care where you're going, babe. Abby chased a strange eeriness from mind as she kept her eyes on the road ahead. Well, if you think the trees are looking at you, that would be pretty weird. And she was rewarded, for around the next seemingly endless bend appeared first a garden house, then a garage, then an absolutely huge and beautiful home with the simple legend, "The Inn," emblazoned on its lamp post. "This must be it," came the resigned rumble from Tom. "Not bad," Louise allowed reluctantly. Abby, however, couldn't restrain her pleasure. "It's charming," she breathed. "Where did it ever come from? I've never heard of an inn being tucked away so successfully." "You don't..." Okay. The van had stopped, and conversation would have done the same had not the officer who opened the door by Abby's side appreciated her enthusiasm. Had not... Okay, sure. When he grinned, she knew she had an ally. "Nice, isn't it? And Southern Vermont's best-kept secret to boot." Oh, that's the guard. I can't remember what voice I was doing, so I don't care. Taking the hand he offered, Abby stepped from the van to admire better her surroundings. "Is it a public place? I mean, can anyone stay here?" That's how hotels usually work, but usually yes, he answered, lending a hand to the older woman before turning toward the house. "Help Tom out of the car, too." Rude. Now, no. There was a certain finality to his tone, a chill reminder of their purpose. Anxious to hear whatever he might say, Abby kept pace with him on the broad flagstone path, her slim-heeled pumps tapping a rhythmic cadence, her full skirt swirling just below her knees. Ooh. She was unaware that the driver of the van had unobtrusively taken up position behind Louise and Tom, and now followed watchfully, in case they bolt, I guess. "One of the reasons this inn was chosen for you folks," the first officer went on, "is that it is secluded and unknown, so to speak. There'll be no other guests staying here for the duration of the trial." Trial. Pulling open the large screen door, he stood back. "Hope you're hungry. Sybil's a terrific cook." At the moment, Abby was indifferent to the enticement offered, for she was suddenly besieged by warring emotions. On one hand, she was thrilled to find herself in the gracious foyer of a sprawling mansion set on acres of land. On the other, she felt no freer than a bird in a cage. One part of her felt pure delight at the thought of vacationing at this inn. The other was appalled at that delight, given the sobriety of the occasion. She felt excitement and trepidation, anticipation and apprehension. Hungry? Not quite. "Ah," came a gentle male voice. "You're here." Abby turned to meet her host, a man whose... How do you know he's your host? Whatever. A man whose kind expression was in keeping with that voice. "I'm Nicholas Abbott, and welcome to the inn." Capital letters. Nicholas Abbott extended his hand to each of them in turn. His warmth helped dispel that chill she'd felt moments before. Dressed casually in slacks, an open-necked shirt, and a golfing sweater that buttoned from waist to hip. Okay. The innkeeper was as gracious as the setting he'd created. That's assuming a lot. He spoke slowly, reassuringly, as if understanding the unsureness his guests had to be feeling. "My wife, Sybil, and I hope to make your stay here as comfortable as possible. We're really a self-contained entity, but if there's anything you need and can't find, please feel free to ask either of us. Or your trusty guards." He cast an eye toward a large room branching from the foyer. "Uh-oh, looks like your trusty guards are hungry." The men in question stood looking longingly toward the end of the room that was beyond Abby's view. Let's go have lunch, her host suggested gently. The others have just begun. I'm sure they won't mind pausing for further introductions. His words brought home the fact that, if this was the beginning for Abby, there were others for whom it was the third day of sequestration. Sequestered. Sequestration. I've just never seen that word. Curious, she followed Nicholas Abbott toward the adjoining room. The two court officers stood aside to let the small troop enter. Abby found herself in an enormous room, the front half of which was comfortably furnished in typically New England parlor style. Which is what? The rear half of which was an elegant dining room dotted with casually set tables for 4, at which were scattered 9 other jurors and 2 additional court officers. Hear ye! Okay. Nicholas made a lively gesture of clapping his hands for attention. It was far from needed. The newcomers had captured every eye in the room the instant they'd enter it. We've got another 3 to add to the group. Okay, so we're missing 2 more. Speaking more softly, he extracted first names from Abby, Louise, and Tom, then went carefully around the room, giving similar identifications to each guarded face. Abby couldn't have remembered 11 names in one round if she'd tried. But you didn't try, did ya? I mean, that's fair. Who among us could? The most she could do was note a fairly even sexual... The most she could do was to note a fairly even sexual split and the predominance of jurors older than herself. Just one woman appeared to be close in age, perhaps even a year or 2 younger. This woman's name she made a point to catch. Patricia. Blonde-haired and fair-skinned, Patricia returned both her interest and the half-smile Abby was able to offer before being ushered to a free table. Moments later, she found herself seated with her fellow new arrivals and a court officer, a woman who had quietly shifted her place setting to their table from that at which she'd begun the meal. Whew. I'm Grace Walsh, she grinned knowingly. Just in case you didn't catch the name the first time around, I'll be here with you throughout the trial. You mean that they don't give you any time off either? Tom grunted in a tone just short of sardonic. It's her job. It's literally her job. Grace shrugged off the question with a dismissing wave. Yeah. Oh, I'll probably have a morning or afternoon off every now and then, but for the most part, you're stuck with me. Smiling, Abby took a closer look at this person with whom she was stuck. In her late 40s, Grace Walsh made a very proper appearance, with her brown hair anchored in a staid bun, her face devoid of makeup, her blue uniform fitting her ample body with just a hint of room to spare. Okay. Yet there was no sign of the grim matron in this woman. No clue to suggest that she might next be walking a criminal to and from a prison wagon. Rather, she seemed eminently approachable, so much so that Abby yielded to her own clamoring curiosity. Tell me, Grace, she began, helplessness written across her features. She's doing this on purpose, right? This has to be an act. How is this all supposed to work? I mean, I know that we'll be cut off from the outside world, but exactly how far does it go? There are those little day-to-day things that people do. Laundry, phone calls, reading. How much of that will be affected? What are you planning, Abby? Are you going to murder people in this? Listen, if this devolved into like an Agatha Christie and then there were none situation, I would be surprised and delighted. The kindness with which Grace responded did little to blunt her words. Everything, I'm afraid. You'll come into contact with no one but courtroom personnel, your fellow jurors, those of us who will be staying with you, and the staff here at the inn. She shifted her gaze to the waitress who approached bearing a large tray. This is Catherine Blaine, the Abbott's oldest daughter. She lives with her own family back in town, but she's here helping out every day. Sounds like a weak point. Then she turned toward Catherine. The stew tastes great. The eldest Abbott daughter grinned. There's plenty more whenever you're ready. Lowering her tray onto a nearby stand, she transferred a basket of bread, a central vegetable dish. What kind of vegetable? Just a central vegetable. And individual salads to the table before returning with a large serving bowl and dishing out hearty helpings of a steaming beef stew. I hope this is okay for you folks. If any of you have any dietary restrictions, please let us know. We'll be glad to make substitutions. Catherine glanced quickly at the table to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, and then returned to the kitchen. God, how long is this chapter? Ugh! Like 4 pages left. Humph! Louise scoffed softly as she eyed the heaping plate before her, and I was worried about my husband gaining weight. Grace turned to Louise and said cheerfully, "One of the beauties of this place is the opportunity for exercise." Damn, Grace. There's a pool out back, but now that the end of September is here, it may be too cool to swim. If any of you run, though, Ray over there, run as in exercise, not run as in flee. She quirked her head toward the guard who'd driven the van and now sat at the table she'd left earlier. Would be more than glad to take you. He's a pro, enters marathons and all, and the paths around this estate are ideal for running. My dad runs marathons. Props to runners. It's not for me. The thought held major appeal for Abby, though. Yikes. She'd been running since she first moved north and discovered that the fresh air, warm in summer, crisp in spring and fall, downright frigid though invigorating in winter, did miracles for the cobwebs that formed periodically in the private corners of her mind. "I might just take him up on that," she quipped. I don't think that word means what you think it means. "I have this funny feeling that after sitting in the courthouse 7 or 8 hours a day, I'm going to need something." Okay. Her reference to the trial seemed to sober them all. How many times do you think we've said the word sober in the last 15 pages? It's been a lot. As Abby listened for it, conversation in the room was sparse. Rather, there were the sounds of eating, silver touching china, the clink of glassware as it moved from table to mouth and back, an occasional cough. Eyes down, she focused on her lunch, eating absently, trying to tell herself that a certain awkwardness was only natural. After all, the people in this room had been thrown together through circumstances quite beyond their control. Each had his own life, his own friends, his own loyalties, and there were still 2 more jurors to be added to the unlikely assortment. When do you think the trial will begin? She broke the silence on impulse to home in on Grace. The woman raised her eyes skyward. "With any luck, we'll get our jury completed this afternoon. If so, opening statements should begin tomorrow morning." Nodding, Abby returned to her meal. Tomorrow morning. At least she wouldn't be waiting around as some of these others had done. 2 more jurors. Her thoughts took a frivolous turn as she wondered again whether that enticingly... I'm so sorry. My eyes skip ahead to the next words. Her thoughts took a frivolous turn as she wondered again whether that enticingly human male... That enticingly human male. Okay. That's what I like in my partners. I like that they're human. Enticingly so. With his casual stance. I like it when they just sort of stand places. And his amused expression would be one of the 2. A surreptitious glance toward the other tables convinced her that he'd be by far the most attractive of the group. Then her eye met Patricia's. And the other gave a meaningfully exaggerated yawn. So the group was as fascinating as she'd feared. Well, there was always Scrabble, or a good book, or if worst came to worst, she could spend her free time writing letters to Sean. She hadn't realized she'd chuckled aloud until Louise called her on it. "You don't seem as bothered by the situation as we are. No husband at home, kids, job." Jeez, Louise. Oh, yes, she replied softly. I certainly have a job. But you're right. I don't have a husband or children to worry about. It makes a difference. Evidently, her frank concession was enough to quell the older woman's curiosity. There were no more questions asked. Indeed, the meal progressed in silence through gingerbread a la mode and a welcome pot of herb tea. It was only when the foursome prepared to leave the table that Grace spoke up. There's one thing I'd like to ask you all now, she began. The judge will elaborate on this tomorrow morning, but let me say quickly that you aren't to discuss this case with anyone. That means no talks with each other after court or at night. That sucks. I know it might get pretty tense holding it all in, but that's the rule. We ask that you honor it. She ended on such an urgent note that for the first time the three nodded in agreement. Good. Now then, she resumed more buoyantly as they headed for the lobby, you've each been assigned a room. That's another nice feature about the inn, capital letters. Private rooms for all. I think I'll have Mr. Abbott show each to his own. Clean up if you want. Take a rest. Then she paused to look around for her quarry. If I can corral my colleagues, we can get down to the business of taking you back to your homes to pick up your things. Okay, there it is. They're gonna go get escorted to their houses. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that Abby finally arrived at her house. She was accompanied by another female officer. I am very impressed at the number of women in this book so far. Lorraine Baker, who'd come to her rescue after Grace had taken off with Louise. It was quite an experience, she was later to muse, to walk through one's own house with a stranger in constant tow. But it was in keeping with the rules of sequestration that had been outlined earlier. Nothing was to influence her now, not the morning's paper, which lay neatly on the kitchen table, nor the Daily Mail, which the policewoman dutifully sorted and censored, nor the best-selling novel, newly bought and ripe for packing, that told the story of a psychopathic rapist. What? Okay. Yeah, I guess you shouldn't take that with you. It's not. Wow. Lorraine was at her elbow examining everything. Most things, clothing, cosmetics, blow dryer, were easily proved and promptly stowed in Abby's canvas traveler. Other things, to her dismay, were vetoed. A headphone cassette system to run with was out. Oh. A headphone cassette system. As was a portable radio or any other device for providing a musical accompaniment to relaxation. That sucks. As Lorraine explained, there couldn't be any risk of an outside message infiltrating by electrical means. Wow. The phone rang 3 times. Each time, Lorraine deftly reached it before Abby. That, too, was an experience. For when the first caller was identified as her neighbor, Cindy, and Abby extended her hand for the receiver, she was amazed as her friend to hear Lorraine politely explain that though Abby couldn't talk, Lorraine would be glad to relay the conversation. Yes, Abby would be serving on the Bradley jury. No, she wouldn't be home again until the trial was over. Yes, it would be a big help if Cindy could call the medical center and tell them the news. No, Abby couldn't have visitors. No, she didn't want to cancel the mail, but would Cindy be kind enough to pick it up for her and sort through it for anything critical? Yes, she had everything she needed, and anything else could be picked up later by one of the court officers. Oh, and could she call Celeste O'Brien and ask her to take over her natural childbirth classes for the next few Saturday mornings? And Sean, would she be a sweetheart and call him for her? Damn. Cindy's, not your secretary, but okay. As it happened, the last was unnecessary, for the second call, coming while the receiver was still warm, it's an odd way to put that, was from none other than the doctor himself. Had she just gotten home from the courthouse? She what? Who was this? And why couldn't Abby come to the phone? It seems like, he seems a little controlling, Abby. I think you should break up with him. Abby's expression warmed in amusement as Lorraine related one after the other of the questions Sean fired. Taking her cue from Abby, she humored him gently. Sean, however, was barely appeased when he finally hung up moments later. That was not a happy man, was Lorraine's wry observation. No, Abby mused as she gathered together some professional journals, some notebooks, pens and pencils, and the leisure reading that had finally been deemed acceptable. I didn't think he would be, she sighed. At least you can't blame me. Break up with him. As she'd anticipated that morning, Abby most definitely sensed relief at the prospect of several weeks away from Sean. She needed the break. Things had grown claustrophobic, because he's a controlling jerk. The peal of the phone wrenched her from her thoughts, though only for a minute. For it was Sean again, with a second round of questions. How long would the trial be lasting? Couldn't he see her, even for a chaperone visit? How could she possibly be chosen to serve on a jury? After all, she was a nurse, and as such was in great demand. Once again, Lorraine fielded the inquiry with practiced flair, relating Abby's responses in those few instances when they were offered. For the most part, Abby stood back and let her guard take the flak. If she truly was to be protected during this experience, she reasoned impishly, shouldn't such protection begin at home? With Sean off the phone once more, though, there was little else to be done. The thermostat was lowered, the lights turned off. I am so proud of you. Look at your eco-friendly thoughts and actions. After a final check of the house, Abby lifted her bags and helped stow them in the wagon Lorraine had driven. As the car moved ahead and the house fell behind, she was filled with the same anticipatory excitement she'd felt that morning in the courthouse. She'd had her wish. She'd been chosen. Now she was looking forward to the experience. We're still not done with Chapter 1. It's been an hour. Later, back at the inn, unpacked and washed up and changed into a soft silk shirtwaist. I'm going to Google shirtwaist. A woman's tailored garment such as a blouse or dress with details copied from men's shirts. Oh, okay. Ooh. Triangle shirtwaist factory fire. Okay. I assume she's also wearing like pants or a skirt. Abby headed downstairs toward the living room where cocktails were being served. Cocktails. 2 drinks per night by decree of the judge. She'd been told only half in jest. Therapeutic, if purely optional. Probably wise. You don't want like a rager at the jury house. Which, rager at the jury house sounds like, I don't even know what it sounds like. Just too drawn into this story, I guess. Pausing on the threshold of the room, she eyed the reserved gathering, the jurors, her counterparts. Somehow she felt discouraged by her impression of them as a subdued, even stoical group. Not that merriment was called for, given the purpose of their presence, but a certain conviviality might help pass the time. Perhaps a drink or two would do wonders at that. Lively crew, isn't it? Came a voice of conspiracy close by her ear. Its deep velvet sound quickly conjured the image of a most intriguing man. Though she'd never heard him speak, the tone that warmed her now held that same spirit she'd seen etched in his features that morning. There was lightness and a sense of adventure, plus a certain ability to take it all in stride. He said 4 words to you. Catching her breath and closing her eyes, Abby dared to hope in that instant that she might be right. Then, tempering enthusiasm with caution, she slowly turned. With her eyes still closed? I guess she opens her eyes. I'm sorry, I was peeking ahead to Chapter 2. That's the end of Chapter 1! We did it! Okay. Some thoughts. I got nothing. I mean, she's really been leaning into like the helplessness aspect. And I kind of want her to be doing it on purpose, but I sort of really doubt that she is. Anyway, that was fun. That was the whole thing I was going to do. I may never read another chapter of this. I have 2 copies of this book and I need to decide what to do with them. My sister said she might want one just because it was funny. So maybe I'll send it to her. She may or may not be expecting me to do that, but joke's on her. Okay. Thanks for watching, if you watched this far. I hope you did. Well, that was a fun way to spend an hour. Goodbye. Oh, hang on. How do I end my podcasts? Thanks for spending this time with me. I hope to talk with you again soon.